My name is Eleanor Hayes, though most people call me Ellie. I am 50 years old, and if you were to pass me on the street, you wouldn't look twice. I'm the woman who buys groceries on Tuesday mornings, the one who knows the mail carrier's name, the one who can tell you the best time to plant tulips in this part of suburban Maryland. My life is a collection of quiet rhythms and predictable routines, a melody played in a minor key. For a long time, I thought this was what a good life was supposed to feel like. I was wrong. They say a person's story can be told through their hands. Mine, if you could see them up close, are a testament to a life spent in service to others. They are not the hands of an artist, though they once were. They are the hands of a mother and a wife. The skin is a little thin, crisscrossed with faint lines from countless hours spent washing dishes, folding laundry, and kneading dough for birthday cakes. There are no calluses from lifting weights or rough patches from working with wood. My hands are soft, worn smooth from a different kind of labor, the invisible, uncompensated labor of love. The sun was just beginning to climb above the neat row of houses on my street this morning. It cast a hazy golden light over the freshly mowed lawns and the carefully tended flower beds. The street was quiet, as it always is at this hour. My neighbors, a young couple with two small children, were still asleep. The retired professor across the way was probably already on his second cup of coffee, but his shades were drawn. I was the only one awake, the silent guardian of this peaceful little cul-de-sac. I stood by the window in my small living room, a mug of Earl Grey tea warming my palms. The house was mine, purchased with my own savings before my marriage to Robert Hayes, though you'd never know it to hear him tell the story. It's a modest, three-bedroom ranch, the kind of house you see in old family sitcoms. It's the house where I raised my children, Olivia and Daniel. Every corner holds a memory. The scuff marks on the hardwood floor from Daniel's tricycle, the faint pencil line on the doorframe marking Olivia's height at 7 years old, the faded yellow wallpaper in the kitchen that I chose because it felt so cheerful. I married Robert when I was a different person. I was in my late 20s, a young art student with a heart full of dreams and a portfolio bursting with life. He was ambitious, charming, and seemed to see something in me that no one else had. He didn't want me to be a struggling artist. He wanted me to be his partner, his support, the foundation upon which he would build an empire. I believed him. We moved to this house, had two beautiful children, and I put my paintbrushes away. My life became a testament to his success. I hosted the dinner parties, I managed the household finances, I handled the children's school events, the doctor's appointments, the scraped knees, the broken hearts. I was the quiet force behind the scenes, the unseen engine that made his life run smoothly. He, in turn, became a successful entrepreneur, a man of power and influence who moved in circles I no longer recognized. He called me his rock, but a rock is something you build on, something that stays in one place while the world moves around it. When the divorce came, it was not with a bang but a whimper. We had simply grown into two different people. He had grown richer, more confident, and more convinced of his own importance. I had grown quieter, more invisible, more deeply rooted in the life he had outgrown. He left me the house, a small alimony payment that felt like charity, and the lingering sense that I had somehow failed him. His words, delivered in a slick, rehearsed tone, still echo in my mind. Ellie, you were a great mother, but a life partner. You just don't have the vision. My children, Olivia and Daniel, are now grown, but they still exist in Robert's orbit. Olivia, my beautiful and brilliant eldest, is a lawyer in New York City. She works at a top firm, wears expensive suits, and speaks in a language of contracts and deadlines. She calls me once a week, precisely at 8:00 p.m. on Sunday, and we talk about her work, her stressful commute, and the latest promotion she's trying to get. She never asks about my day. She sees my life as a cautionary tale, a blueprint for what she doesn't want to become. She believes I should have fought for more, that my quiet sacrifice was a sign of weakness, not strength. Daniel, my sensitive, artistic son, lives in a small apartment in a trendy part of the city, struggling to make a name for himself as a painter. He calls me more often, but his conversations are always about his latest struggles. The gallery that rejected his work, the job he can't hold down, the constant financial pressures. He loves me, I know he does, but he also sees me as a bank, a last resort, a source of comfort that he doesn't fully understand. He doesn't know that my quiet life is the result of a conscious choice, not a lack of ambition. So here I am, alone with my Earl Grey and the rising sun. My life feels like a book with too many blank pages. It's filled with the memories of a family I built, a family that no longer seems to need me. The silence in the house is a heavy blanket, a constant reminder of the emptiness that has settled in. I am not sad, not really. Sadness implies a storm, a hurricane of emotion. This is just a quiet, persistent drizzle, a slow draining river. It is the feeling of being a vessel that has fulfilled its purpose and is now simply waiting for a new one. I just didn't realize until this very moment that a new purpose was a possibility at all. The tea in my mug had long since gone cold. I moved to the kitchen, a space that felt more like a memory than a room. It was where I'd taught Olivia how to scramble eggs, where I'd let Daniel use every single pot and pan to create his masterpiece sculptures from Play Doh, where I'd wiped away more tears and celebrated more small victories than I could count. The scent of coffee, of cinnamon, of burnt toast from a distant morning, all hung in the air, a familiar perfume of a life lived. I poured the cold tea down the sink, the sound of the water a sharp contrast to the silence. It was then I saw it, lying on the counter where the mail carrier had left it, a thick, cream-colored envelope, its weight and formal texture feeling entirely out of place among the usual junk mail and catalogs. My hands, so accustomed to the mundane, hesitated as I picked it up. The return address was unfamiliar. Mackenzie, Miller and Thorne LLP, attorneys at law. My heart gave a little skip. Lawyers. The word felt like a slap in the face. It was the word that had ended my marriage, the word that felt synonymous with conflict and loss. I almost put it back down, almost threw it in the recycling bin without opening it, but a small, persistent curiosity gnawed at me. What could they possibly want with Eleanor Hayes, a woman who lived her life in the margins? I slid a finger under the seal and opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, typewritten on heavy bond paper, signed with a flourish I couldn't decipher. The first paragraph was standard, formal jargon, and my eyes glazed over. But then a name jumped out at me so unexpected that it pulled me up short, Aunt Beatrice. My heart started to beat a little faster. Aunt Beatrice. A distant relative, a gray tan I hadn't seen since I was a child. She had been a free-spirited, eccentric artist who lived in a cabin in Vermont, miles away from the practical, suburban life I had built. My parents had told me she was a little unusual, and I had never given her much thought. The letter explained that Aunt Beatrice had passed away 6 months ago, and I was a beneficiary of her estate. A small, polite gasp escaped my lips. I read on, my eyes scanning the words, my brain struggling to process them. It wasn't just a small sum of money or a piece of jewelry. The letter stated, in no uncertain terms, that I was the sole beneficiary of her entire estate, a substantial portfolio of properties and investments, including a large art studio in Vermont and a meticulously curated collection of her own work. My hand trembled as I reread the last sentence of the second paragraph, the words blurring on the page. The terms of this inheritance are conditional. My breath hitched. Conditional? What could that possibly mean? I flipped the page, my mind racing. The letter explained that Aunt Beatrice's will was a deeply personal document, and she had attached a codicil. To receive the inheritance, I had to meet a specific set of criteria. I had to produce, within 1 year, a portfolio of original artworks that demonstrated a return to my artistic passion, and I had to exhibit that work publicly. Failure to meet these conditions would result in the entire estate being donated to an obscure charity I'd never heard of. I sank into one of the kitchen chairs, the formal letter a shocking contrast to the familiar, cheerful wallpaper I had chosen decades ago. The old memories came flooding back, unbidden and overwhelming. The feel of a cool paintbrush in my hand, the vibrant colors of oil paint on a palette, the smell of turpentine and canvas. I remembered the joy, the freedom, the sense of purpose that came from creating something out of nothing. I had been so good at it. My art had been featured in local galleries, praised by professors, and admired by my peers. Robert had loved that part of me at first, or so I thought. He had called it charming, a fun hobby, a side note to his ambitious life. Then, as his business grew, my art had become impractical, a distraction from the life he was building for us. Eventually, I had packed away my canvases and my brushes, sealing them in boxes and storing them in the attic like a secret I was no longer allowed to keep. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. The one thing I had sacrificed for my family was now the very thing I had to reclaim in order to secure a future for myself. I felt a confusing mix of emotions, a thrill of fear, a spark of hope, and a deep-seated sadness for the woman I had once been. My phone buzzed on the counter. It was Olivia, her name flashing across the screen with a photo of her in a perfectly tailored suit. I ignored it. I couldn't talk to her right now. Not with this letter in my hand. Not with a secret so big it felt like a physical weight in the room. I knew my children wouldn't understand. They would see it as a distraction, a frivolous pursuit. They had spent their lives watching me be a mother and a wife, a quiet, supportive presence. They didn't know the Eleanor who had a fire in her soul, the Eleanor who longed to create. They didn't know the woman who had traded her dreams for their well-being. And Robert would see it as a new opportunity to exploit, another chance to manipulate me. I had to keep this from them. The thought of their judgment, of their attempts to control or co-opt my choices, filled me with a quiet dread. I had spent a lifetime living for others. This time, I had to do it for myself. I folded the letter carefully, put it back in the envelope, and tucked it into a drawer, a secret waiting to be revealed. The silence in the house suddenly felt less empty and more like a space to be filled. I knew exactly where the key to the attic was. The key to the attic was cold and smooth against my fingertips. I didn't unlock the door right away. Instead, I stood in the hallway, listening. The house was a quiet echo chamber, and in the silence, I could hear the ghosts of my past. I heard the faint sound of Robert's impatient sighs when I was late with dinner, the distant laughter of Olivia and Daniel chasing each other up the stairs, the creak of the floorboards beneath a different me, a me with a full heart and an empty portfolio. I had always been good at listening to the silent language of this house. Today, it was telling me a new story, a story of an opportunity I had almost let pass me by. My hand still on the key, I made a decision. I wouldn't tell them, not yet. Not until I knew what this meant, not until I had faced the woman in the attic, the artist I had buried. I turned the key, and the old lock groaned in protest. A wave of stale, dusty air washed over me. The attic was a graveyard of memories, a place where things went to die. There was Daniel's first baseball mitt, a tricycle with a bent wheel, stacks of old photo albums tied with faded ribbons. And there, tucked behind a broken rocking horse, were two large cardboard boxes. My boxes. I pulled them out, the dust motes dancing in the narrow beam of light from the small attic window. One box was full of my canvases, still wrapped in brown paper, their faces turned inward like a group of shy children. The other held my paints, my brushes, my palettes, all neatly arranged and untouched for 20 years. I ran a finger over the smooth, worn wood of a palette knife, a tool that had once been an extension of my soul. A knot of emotion, a mix of sadness and regret, tightened in my throat. I had let go of so much. I had let my dreams wither and fade to make room for theirs. Just as I was about to open a canvas, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Olivia. Mom, her voice, sharp and efficient, cut through the quiet of the attic. I'm on my way. I'll be there in about 45 minutes. My heart sank. Liv, you didn't tell me you were coming. I'm coming to talk to you about something important, she said, and I could hear the impatience in her tone. Daniel's going to be there too. He called me this morning about a new project. I think we need to have a family meeting. She hung up before I could respond. The timing felt like a cruel joke. I had just found the key to my past, and my children were coming to remind me of the life I had chosen, the life they still didn't understand. I quickly put the boxes back, locked the attic, and went downstairs. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee, a nervous habit I had perfected over the years, and tried to prepare myself. 45 minutes later, Olivia's expensive sedan pulled into my driveway. She got out, her movements precise and confident, carrying a large leather briefcase. Daniel's beat-up old truck was right behind her. He emerged from the driver's seat, his hair a wild mess, his clothes spattered with paint. The sight of them, so different from each other, yet so alike in their self-absorption, filled me with a familiar weariness. "Mom," Olivia said, not bothering with a hug. She strode into the kitchen, her eyes immediately scanning the countertops. "You still have that same wallpaper, you know. You should really update this place. It would add a lot of value." Daniel, in contrast, gave me a long hug. "Mom, you look tired," he said, his voice soft. But then, as he pulled away, his eyes landed on the coffee pot. "You didn't make any food, did you? I'm starving." We sat at the kitchen table, a place where all our family discussions, both happy and sad, had taken place. Olivia opened her briefcase, her movements deliberate and professional. Daniel, meanwhile, back in his chair, his gaze drifting around the room as if he were looking for inspiration. "Mom, Daniel tells me you've been doing well," Olivia began, her tone formal. "He mentioned you might be able to help him out with his new project, a new studio lease, some equipment." My blood ran cold, so this was it, the reason for their surprise visit. "It's a really big deal, Mom," Daniel interjected. "It's a collective. We're going to be a group of artists. Showing our work together, it's a huge opportunity." He didn't look at me when he said this. He looked at Olivia as if waiting for her to approve. I looked from one to the other, the pieces of their conversation falling into place. They weren't here to see me, they were here for what I could give them. The same thing I had been giving them for years, my resources, my energy, my time. "Daniel, your mother is not a bank," Olivia said, her voice sharp. "But I do think this is a good investment. His current apartment is, well, it's not conducive to creativity." She said the last word with an air of professional condescension. "I've already told you I don't have that kind of money, Daniel," I said, my voice quiet but firm. Daniel's face fell. "But you always found a way, Mom. Remember when I needed that art history book and it cost a fortune? Or when Olivia needed to fly to that debate competition in Boston?" "That was different," I said, the words heavy with a history they refused to acknowledge. "That was your future. This is—" I stopped myself. I couldn't tell them about the letter. Just then my phone chimed, a text from an unknown number. "Eleanor, I'm at the door. I believe you know who this is." It was Robert. The timing was too perfect, too orchestrated. I felt a surge of cold dread. He was here to complicate everything, to remind me of the past, and to try to control my future. The silent ghosts of my sacrifice were suddenly very loud. I didn't need to check the text again. I knew it was him. It was always him. He was like a bad penny, always turning up at the most inconvenient times, and his arrival now, in the middle of a tense family meeting, felt deliberately orchestrated. I stood up, my knees feeling weak. "Who was that, Mom?" Olivia asked, her lawyer's instincts kicking in. She was sharp, observant, always looking for a weakness in the narrative. "No one, just a wrong number," I lied, a little too quickly, but it was too late. The doorbell rang, a chime I hadn't heard in months. The sound felt like an intruder's knock. I glanced at Olivia and Daniel, who were now looking at me with a mixture of confusion and curiosity. I knew I couldn't lie my way out of this. I walked to the door and opened it. There he was, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, his silver hair perfectly styled. Robert Hayes, the man who had traded our family for a corner office and a life of shallow victories. He held a bottle of expensive red wine in one hand, a meaningless peace offering, and a smug, practiced smile on his face. "Ellie," he said, his voice a smooth, familiar rumble. "Fancy seeing you. Daniel told me you were all here for a family meeting, so I thought I'd drop by. No big deal, right?" He didn't wait for my permission. He simply stepped inside, his presence filling my small, humble kitchen with an air of expensive cologne and overpowering confidence. Olivia and Daniel stood up immediately, their expressions shifting from tension to surprise. Robert was a different man to them than he was to me. To them, he was their father, the successful man who had built a life of comfort and privilege. He was the one who paid for their tuition, their apartments, their dreams. He was their provider, their hero. They didn't see the man who had made me put away my life's work in the attic. "Dad, what are you doing here?" Daniel asked, his voice a mixture of annoyance and curiosity. "Just checking in on the family," Robert said, his eyes on me. His gaze was calculating, sharp, as if he were trying to read my every thought. He knew something was up. I could feel it. Besides, I hear Daniel has a new project. I wanted to hear all about it. He walked over to the kitchen table and pulled up a chair as if he belonged there. He sat down, looked at me, and his smile didn't reach his eyes. Ellie, you know I've always been worried about you. Living here all alone. You need someone to look after you. The words were a dagger. I could feel the insult behind them, the patronizing tone that suggested I was too fragile, too incompetent to take care of myself. Olivia, to her credit, looked uncomfortable. Daniel, however, seemed to hang on every word. Dad's right, Daniel said, looking at me. Mom, you can't just live here forever. You need to do something with your life. He didn't realize the irony of his words, of course. Robert seized the moment, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. I've been doing some thinking, kids, about Mom's situation. He leaned forward, his elbows on the table. She's not getting any younger, and the cost of living keeps going up. I was thinking we could sell this house. It's too small for her anyway. And with the money, we could buy her a nice condo, something more manageable, you know? The idea was a direct attack on my life, on my home, on the sanctuary I had created for myself. I felt my face flush with anger, but before I could respond, he continued, and with the rest of the money, we could use it to help you two get on your feet. Daniel, your art studio. Olivia, maybe a down payment on a place of your own. It's a win-win for everyone. His proposal was a brilliant, manipulative move. He was using my children as pawns, appealing to their ambitions and their selfishness to get what he wanted. He was trying to force my hand, to make me sell the one thing I had left, the one thing he hadn't managed to take from me in the divorce. That's a great idea, Dad, Daniel said, his eyes lighting up. Mom, you can't say no to this. This is what I've been talking about. You could help us. This is for all of us. Olivia, the pragmatist, looked at me. I could see the wheels turning in her head, calculating the financial benefits. She was a lawyer. She understood the value of a deal. She knew this was a good offer, a logical one, but she also saw the hidden cost. She saw the pain in my eyes. For a moment, a flicker of something passed through her expression, something that looked like doubt. Robert, this is my house, I said, my voice barely a whisper. It is not for sale. His smile vanished. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes hard and cold. Ellie, let's be realistic. This house is a burden. And what are you going to do with your life? Just sit here and stare at the walls? You have no purpose, no vision. The word, his favorite word, hung in the air between us, a cruel reminder of my past, of the choices I had made. He was trying to break me to make me feel small, to make me doubt myself. He had been doing it for years. I have my own plans, I said, and as I said the words, I felt a new sense of strength, a new purpose. The letter in my drawer felt like a shield, a secret weapon. Robert laughed, a hollow, humorless sound. Plans? What plans, Ellie? You haven't had a plan in 20 years. He turned to Olivia and Daniel. She's in denial. She thinks she can just get by on her own, but she can't. This is the best thing for her, and for you, think about it. He had succeeded. He had planted the seed of doubt in my children's minds, turning them against me, using their own desires to blind them to his true intentions. He had made me the enemy. I knew then that I had to fight back, not for the money, not for the house, but for myself. I had to prove to them and to myself that I was more than just a mother, more than just a wife. I was Eleanor Hayes, and my story was just beginning. The silence that followed Robert's departure was heavier than his presence. He had dropped his bomb and left, knowing the fallout would do his work for him. Olivia and Daniel looked at me, not with concern, but with a new kind of speculation. They saw me not as their mother, but as an obstacle to their ambitions. Mom, he's right, Daniel said, his voice hesitant. This house is so old. You deserve a change, and a new place would be so much better for you. You wouldn't have to worry about the yard or the repairs. It makes sense, you know? Olivia, ever the strategist, put a hand on his arm. Daniel, let's think this through. Dad's offer is generous, but we need to see the numbers. Mom, what do you think? It's a great opportunity for all of us. She wasn't asking for my opinion. She was stating the terms of a negotiation. I looked at their faces, two halves of a whole I had once created. They had been so easy to manipulate, so eager to believe in a plan that benefited them. They didn't see that Robert's generosity was just a clever disguise for his control. They didn't see that he was trying to strip me of the one thing I had left that was truly mine. I said no, I repeated, my voice stronger this time. This house is not for sale. But why, Mom? Olivia asked, her patience wearing thin. This is just emotional. You need to be practical. You're living alone in a house that's too big for you, and we're struggling. This is a chance for a fresh start. My life is not a spreadsheet, Olivia, I said, a rare flash of anger in my voice. And my home is not an investment, it's my sanctuary. I knew I had to distract them to get them off the topic before I said something I would regret. Now, if you're not here to visit, then I have things to do. I have a class to get to. Their expressions turned from speculative to outright confused. A class? What are you talking about, Mom? Daniel asked. I've decided to take a painting class, I said, the words feeling both foreign and exhilarating. I've always wanted to get back into it. Olivia looked at me as if I'd just announced I was joining the circus. A painting class, Mom, seriously? That's what you're worried about right now? When we're talking about your financial future? She shook her head. A familiar gesture of disappointment. This is exactly what Dad was talking about. You're so disconnected from reality. It's a step toward a new reality, I said, standing my ground. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'll be late. They left, defeated for now, but I knew this was just the first round. Their departure left the house in a cold silence. I went to my bedroom, changed into an old pair of jeans and a t-shirt, and found my car keys. I had to do this. I had to prove them wrong, and I had to prove to myself that I was still capable of creating something beautiful. The art supply store was a riot of color and possibility. I walked down the aisles, the smell of canvas and paint filling my senses, a scent I hadn't realized I'd missed so much. I bought new brushes, new tubes of paint, and a small, fresh canvas. It felt like I was purchasing a piece of my soul. My first class was in a brightly lit studio in a local community center. The room was filled with artists of all ages, all with different skill levels. I felt a pang of nervousness, a feeling I hadn't experienced in years. The instructor, a kind woman with paint-splattered jeans and a warm smile, welcomed me with a kindness that felt like a hug. I set up my easel, took out my new canvas, and looked at the blank white space. For 20 years, I had been an empty canvas, a background for other people's lives. I had been filled with their colors, their shapes, their desires. Now, for the first time in a long time, the canvas was mine. I dipped my brush into a vibrant blue paint, a color I hadn't used in years. My hand, so accustomed to the mundane tasks of a housewife, felt clumsy at first. My strokes were hesitant, uncertain. But as I continued to paint, a strange sense of peace came over me. The world outside the studio, with its real estate negotiations and family tensions, began to fade away. All that mattered was the canvas in front of me, the colors on my palette, the rhythm of my brush against the canvas. I painted the memory of a summer sky, the kind of sky that stretches on forever, the kind of sky I used to lie under with my children, pointing out shapes in the clouds. I painted the memory of the light on the surface of a quiet pond, a pond I had visited once with Robert, a place that had felt so peaceful before his ambition had consumed it. Hours passed, and the bell rang, signaling the end of the class. I looked at my canvas, a strange mix of emotions swirling inside me. It wasn't perfect. The lines were a little shaky, the colors a little muddled, but it was mine. It was a tangible piece of a life I had thought was gone forever. As I was packing up my supplies, the instructor came over and looked at my canvas. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there, her head cocked to one side. I braced myself for her critique, for the gentle correction that I was doing it all wrong. Instead, she smiled. There's a story here, she said, her voice soft. I can feel the history in every brush stroke. You haven't painted in a long time, have you? I shook my head, my eyes welling up with tears. No, I said, my voice thick with emotion. It's been 20 years. She nodded, a knowing look on her face. Sometimes the best stories are the ones that take the longest to tell. Don't stop now, you have so much to say. Her words were a balm, a quiet validation I hadn't realized I was so desperate for. I walked out of the studio and into the evening light, my canvas tucked carefully under my arm. The world was still filled with the same challenges, the same people, the same worries. But for the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of hope. I had a purpose, a plan, and I wouldn't let anyone, not Robert, not Olivia, and not Daniel, take it from me. This was my journey, and it had just begun. I returned home from the art studio and placed the canvas, still damp with a promise of a sky I had almost forgotten, on the mantel. It was a small rebellion, a defiant splash of color in a house that had been painted in shades of obligation and self sacrifice for 20 years. The next morning, I went to my little office, the one I had organized to pay bills and manage household budgets, and I began to research. The lawyer's letter lay open on my desk, the conditions of the inheritance suddenly feeling less like a burden and more like a liberation. But before I could dive into the world of legal documents and estate trusts, my phone rang. It was Daniel. His voice was tight, a familiar sound of desperation. Mom, you have to talk to Dad. He's cutting me off. My heart sank. What do you mean, cutting you off? My credit card, the one for my studio supplies, it was declined this morning. Dad just texted me and said he's done paying for my frivolous art projects unless I get on board with his plan. He didn't sound angry at his father, only at me. He said you're being stubborn and that you're forcing his hand. He says he's trying to do what's best for you, but you're making it difficult for everyone. The manipulation was so transparent, so predictable, that it made my blood boil. Robert wasn't just trying to control me. He was using my son as a weapon against me. He was starving Daniel of the one thing he needed most, financial support, and blaming me for it. Daniel, this isn't my fault, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. This is your father's doing. He's using you to get what he wants. No, Mom, he said, his voice rising in frustration. He's trying to help you. He's right. You need a change. You can't just live in that house forever, pretending everything is fine. You're holding us back. He promised to help me with the lease if you just agreed to sell the house. It's so simple. I felt a familiar knot of pain in my stomach. He didn't see it. He couldn't see the years of quiet labor, the countless hours I had spent making his world run smoothly. He only saw me as a means to an end. Robert had succeeded in turning him against me, in making me the villain in his story. Daniel, listen to me, I pleaded. Robert doesn't care about your art. He only cares about the money. He's playing a game and you're his pawn, but he wasn't listening. I need that money, Mom. My collective is depending on me. I'm going to lose everything if I can't get that studio. Please just talk to him. Tell him you'll do it. His desperation was so raw, so powerful, that for a moment I almost gave in. I almost agreed to give up my home, my past, my future, just to ease his pain. Then I looked at the little painting on the mantel, the sky I had created from memory. It was imperfect, yes, but it was mine. It was the first thing I had made for myself in 20 years. And I knew that if I gave in now, I would not only lose my home, but I would lose myself completely. I can't do that, Daniel, I said, my voice firm. I'm sorry, but I can't. The silence on the other end of the line was a cold, empty void. Fine, he said, his voice flat. Then I guess I have no choice. I'm going to have to do this myself. Don't call me, Mom, not until you've come to your senses. He hung up, leaving me in the silence with the lingering sting of his betrayal. The pain was a physical thing, a crushing weight on my chest. I had spent so long being their rock, their safe place, that I had forgotten how to stand on my own. But now I had no choice. I decided to take action. I went to the bank and withdrew a small sum of money, just enough to get by on for a few weeks without touching my limited savings. I also opened a new account, a private one, and I began to transfer small amounts of money into it, a secret fund for my art. I had to become resourceful. I had to learn to take care of myself. That evening, I drove to a local art supply store. I needed a bigger canvas, more paints, a better easel. As I was walking down an aisle, a familiar voice called out to me. Ellie? It was Robert. He was standing there, his arms crossed over his chest, a smug look on his face. He wasn't surprised to see me. He had probably expected this. He had orchestrated this. What are you doing here? I asked, my voice cold. He laughed, a condescending sound. I came to buy some things for my new apartment. I'm thinking of commissioning a few pieces from a local gallery. You know, supporting the arts. It's a shame you gave up on that a long time ago. Your work was, well, it was a nice hobby. He was doing it again. He was trying to minimize me to make me feel small. You should really think about my offer, Ellie, he said, his voice dropping to a low whisper. You don't want to lose your kids over a house, do you? They're on my side, you know. They see things clearly. They see what you're not willing to admit, that you need my help, that you can't do this alone. He was telling the truth. They were on his side. He had turned them against me, and now he was gloating. But in that moment, as I looked at him, I didn't see the charming man I had married. I saw a bully, a manipulative child who had never grown up, and I knew that I was stronger than he was. I'm not doing this alone, Robert, I said, a new confidence in my voice. I have my own strength now, and I have a purpose. He just looked at me, a flicker of something, confusion, perhaps, or surprise in his eyes. He didn't understand. He couldn't. He had always seen me as a prop, a tool to be used and discarded. He didn't know that I was finally picking up the pieces of myself. I turned away from him and walked to the checkout counter, my head held high. I paid for my art supplies, and as I walked out of the store, I felt a new sense of freedom. I was no longer a ghost in my own life. I was a person, and my story was a canvas waiting for my hand to paint it. Daniel had chosen his path. Now I would choose mine. The next few weeks were a blur of creation. I spent my days in the studio, a place that felt more like home than my actual house. I painted with a fervor I hadn't felt in decades. My canvases were not just landscapes or still lifes, they were emotional maps of my life. I painted the faded yellow of my kitchen walls, the color now a symbol of both comfort and entrapment. I painted the cool, sterile white of Robert's office, the place where he had made his plans without me. I painted the bruised purple of a sunset I had watched alone, a sky full of colors he had never stopped to appreciate. My art became my therapy, a way to process the unspoken pains and quiet triumphs of a lifetime of sacrifice. I was so consumed by my work that I barely noticed when my phone buzzed with an incoming call from Olivia. I had been so focused on painting, on reclaiming my own space, that I hadn't checked my messages in hours. I wiped my hands on an old rag and answered. Mom, we need to talk. Olivia's voice was different this time. It wasn't the usual sharp, professional tone. It was a mixture of frustration and something I couldn't quite place. It sounded like panic. What's wrong? I asked, a knot forming in my stomach. It's Dad, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. He's not telling us everything. I've been doing some research, looking into his finances. He's not as well off as he says he is. A sense of cautious hope sparked within me. What did you find? I don't know the whole story yet, but I found some old documents on his business server that he thought were deleted. It looks like he made some bad investments a few years ago. He's leveraged everything he owns, and he's in serious debt. I think that's why he wanted to get his hands on your money. The money from? Well, from whatever this new thing is you've got going on. Her voice trailed off, a hint of genuine curiosity in her tone. My heart pounded against my ribs, so that was it. The grand, generous gesture was nothing more than a desperate play for my inheritance. I felt a wave of cold clarity wash over me. He wasn't trying to help me. He was trying to save himself, and he was using our children to do it. He's been lying to you, Olivia, I said, my voice firm. He has been from the start. I know, she said, a quiet sense of defeat in her voice. I feel so foolish. I've been so focused on my own career, on my own ambitions, that I never stopped to look at what was right in front of me. He used us, Mom. He used me, your own daughter, to try and manipulate you. I felt a pang of sympathy for her. She had been so caught up in the corporate world, in the language of success and failure, that she had forgotten how to read the language of the heart. He's good at it, I said. He's been doing it for years. There's more. Olivia continued, and I could hear her typing on her keyboard in the background. I found some emails. He's been in contact with Daniel's landlord, trying to sabotage his studio lease. He was planning to swoop in and pay for it himself, but only if you agreed to sell the house. She paused. He was going to buy Daniel's support. He never really cared about his art. The betrayal was so deep, so calculated, that it took my breath away. He was willing to sacrifice his own son's dreams for a few extra dollars. I need to talk to Daniel, I said. No, Mom, wait, Olivia said, her voice urgent. Dad is still monitoring his emails. If he thinks we're on to him, he'll disappear. I have an idea. a way to get him to reveal himself, to admit to everything. Her plan was bold and risky. It involved me calling Robert, pretending to be desperate and willing to sell the house to beg him for his help. It was a performance, a play in which I would be the lead actress. I had spent so many years playing a role, the dutiful wife, the perfect mother, that the idea of putting on a new performance for my own benefit felt oddly liberating. "I'll do it," I said, and as I said the words, I felt a new sense of strength. The plan was simple. I would call Robert from a burner phone, a prepaid cell phone I had bought earlier that day, and feign desperation. Olivia, meanwhile, would be monitoring his emails and phone records, looking for a signal, a sign that he was taking the bait. I walked out of the art studio and sat in my car. I held the phone in my hand, my heart pounding in my chest. I had to do this. I had to do this for myself, for Daniel, for Olivia. I had to expose him for what he was, a fraud, a thief, a man who had no vision of his own and was willing to steal the vision of others. I pressed the call button, and the phone rang. He answered on the first ring, his voice smooth and confident. "Ellie, my dear, I was just about to call you. I was wondering if you had thought about my proposal." "Robert," I said, my voice trembling, my heart pounding in my ears. I didn't have to fake the emotion. I'm so confused. This art thing? It's not working. I can't do it. I think you're right. I need your help. I think I'm ready to sell the house." A triumphant laugh escaped his lips. He had won. He had manipulated me, my children, our family, and he had won. But he didn't know that his victory was an illusion, a moment of fleeting pride that would soon crumble into dust. "I knew you'd come to your senses, Ellie. I knew you would." He began to outline his plan, his voice full of a smug satisfaction that made my skin crawl. He talked about the lawyers, the documents, the money. He didn't know that with every word he spoke, he was building a case against himself, a case that would soon be presented to the world. And I, the woman he had always considered to be so insignificant, so powerless, was now the one holding all the cards. I was the one pulling the strings. I was the one who had finally learned how to play his game, and I was about to end it. I hung up the phone with Robert and sat in my car, my hands shaking. The fake desperation in my voice had become real, not because I was afraid of him, but because of the deep sadness that had settled in my heart. He had been so quick to believe me, so eager to seize what he thought was a weakness. He had no idea that my surrender was just a prelude to a final attack. I drove home and walked into my empty house. It felt different now. The silence was no longer heavy. It was a space I was reclaiming. I went to my office and pulled out the legal pad and pen I had used to sketch out my research. My hands didn't shake this time. They were steady. I was no longer a victim. I was a strategist. I was about to call Olivia when a notification popped up on my phone. It was an email from Daniel. The subject line was urgent. I opened it and my breath caught in my throat. It was a link to a file with a short message. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I think I made a mistake." I clicked on the link and a document opened on my screen. It was a contract for the studio lease with Robert's signature at the bottom. The terms were staggering. Robert had offered to pay for Daniel's lease, but in exchange, he would own a 50% stake in Daniel's art collective. He would have final say on all creative decisions, and all of Daniel's work would have to be sold through a gallery he owned. Daniel wasn't just getting help, he was selling his soul. I scrolled down further and I saw a new email from Daniel. "Dad just sent me this. He wants me to sign it today." The file attached was a new agreement, one that stipulated that if I sold my house and gave Robert the money, he would generously give Daniel an additional loan, a loan with a 10% interest rate. Daniel wasn't a partner, he was a debtor. He was a pawn in Robert's game, and he had been willing to sacrifice his dreams for a quick fix. I felt a wave of sadness wash over me. It wasn't sadness for myself, but for him. He was so desperate, so blinded by his ambition, that he was willing to trade his freedom for a few dollars. I called Daniel, my voice full of a love that was now tinged with pain. "Daniel," I said, my voice soft. "I saw the contract. I saw what your father is doing. I saw the loan agreement. You would have been his puppet." Silence. The silence was more powerful than any word he could have spoken. He knew. He had seen the truth, and he had been willing to ignore it. "He told me he had to do it," Daniel said, his voice a whisper. He said he was trying to protect his investment. He said he was just being smart. He was just being a father who was willing to use his son to get what he wanted. I said, the words heavy with a truth he had refused to see. He used you, Daniel. He used your passion, your dreams, to try and get his hands on my money. I know, he said, his voice breaking. I'm so sorry, Mom. I should have listened to you. The conversation was a turning point. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the truth, about a son who had finally seen his father for what he was, a manipulator, a liar, a man who had no respect for anyone, not even his own children. That evening, I got a call from Olivia. Her voice was firm, professional, but beneath the surface, I could hear the emotion. Mom, I have some news. I just got off the phone with my investigator. The debt is bigger than we thought. He's leveraged everything, even the company. He's been in contact with some very shady people, Mom. He's in a lot of trouble. What kind of trouble? I asked, my heart pounding. He's been embezzling money from his own company to cover his debts. It's a house of cards, Mom. He's desperate. He's been trying to get his hands on your money to save himself. The truth was even uglier than I had imagined. He wasn't just trying to get what he wanted. He was trying to save himself from a financial ruin that he had created. He was a thief, a liar, a man who had no respect for anyone, not even himself. I've set up a meeting with his lawyers, she said, her voice a little too calm. I have a plan, Mom. It's time to play our hand. The plan was simple and it was brilliant. We would pretend to go along with Robert's plan. I would agree to sell the house, to give him the money. We would sign all the papers, and when the money was in his account, we would strike. We would file a lawsuit, and we would expose him for what he was. I was nervous. The idea of playing a game with such high stakes was terrifying. But as I sat in my small office with my canvases and my paints and the legal pad filled with my research, I knew I had to do it. I was no longer fighting for the house or the money. I was fighting for myself, for Daniel, for Olivia. I was fighting for a family that had been torn apart by a man who had no respect for anyone but himself. I took a deep breath and I looked at the painting on the mantel. The sky was still there, imperfect but beautiful. It was a reminder that even after the darkest storm, there was always a light, a hope, a chance for a new beginning. I was ready. I was ready to face him. I was ready to end this game once and for all. The day of my art exhibition was cold and gray, a stark contrast to the vibrant colors of my work. It was a local gallery, small and intimate, the kind of place where art was appreciated for its soul, not its price tag. The canvases I had poured my heart into were hung on the walls, a silent, powerful testament to a life I had once lived and was now reclaiming. Each painting was a chapter of my story. The first tentative brushstrokes representing my return to art, the bolder, more confident colors of my final pieces representing my newfound strength. I was in the middle of a conversation with my instructor when Olivia arrived. She wasn't in a business suit. She was wearing a simple black dress, and her face, usually so composed and professional, was filled with a mixture of pride and a quiet, vulnerable emotion I hadn't seen in years. Mom, she said, her voice soft. I'm so proud of you. These are incredible. I smiled, a genuine, joyful smile. Thank you, Liv. I couldn't have done it without you. Daniel was next to arrive. He was dressed in a clean shirt and his hair was combed for a change. He looked at the paintings, his eyes filled with a raw, emotional vulnerability. He walked from one canvas to another, his hands in his pockets, his body language a silent apology. He stopped in front of the painting of the summer sky. It was a simple piece, a landscape of a field of wildflowers beneath a sky of 100 shades of blue. It was a scene from his childhood, a moment we had shared 1,000 times. I remember that, he said, his voice a whisper. You used to take us there. You used to tell us to lie down and look at the sky. You said we could find anything in the clouds. You did, I said, a wave of emotion washing over me. You always found the best things. The three of us stood there, a quiet island in a sea of people, and for the first time in years we were a family again. The silence was not empty. It was filled with unspoken apologies, with a deep, profound love that had been buried beneath years of resentment and misunderstanding. Just as I was about to say something, the gallery door opened and a sudden hush fell over the room. There he was, Robert Hayes, dressed in a tailored suit, a forced, polished smile on his face. He wasn't alone. He was with a group of men in suits, all with the same cold, calculating look in their eyes. This was his move. He was here to make his play, to reveal his victory to the world. He walked to the center of the room, his eyes scanning the paintings, a condescending smirk on his face. He looked at me, his eyes full of a triumphant arrogance. Ellie, he said, his voice loud and clear, a performance for his business associates. I'm so glad I could make it. I heard you were having a little art show. It's so charming. He looked at the painting of the summer sky and his smirk widened. I remember that. You used to paint that all the time. It was a nice hobby. I suppose a little simplistic, but nice. He turned to his associates and his voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. Gentlemen, you'll have to forgive my ex-wife. She's a good woman, but she's a little emotionally fragile. She's had a rough time lately, and she's a little confused about our financial situation. She thinks she can get by on her own, but she's not equipped to handle the realities of the business world. It's a sad thing to see, really, but a man's got to do what a man's got to do. He was laying the groundwork for his defense, establishing the narrative that I was incompetent, that he was the only one who could protect me from myself. My blood ran cold. This was a direct attack on my character, on my intelligence, on everything I had worked for. But I didn't back down. I was no longer the woman who had put her paintbrushes away. I was the woman who had reclaimed them. Robert, I said, my voice cutting through the quiet of the gallery. This isn't about my financial situation. This is about your moral one. His smile faltered. He didn't expect me to fight back. Ellie, don't be ridiculous. This is a private matter. We can discuss this later. No, I said, my voice rising in confidence. We'll discuss it now, in front of everyone, in front of the people who know me and the people who know you. I want everyone to know the truth. What truth? Said, his voice laced with venom. That you're too old to understand the real world, that you're trying to use a few paintings to get out of a hole you've dug for yourself. Just then, Olivia stepped forward, her lawyer's instincts taking over. She was holding a large, thick manila folder. The truth, Dad, she said, her voice clear and precise, is that you've been lying to everyone. You've been lying to me. You've been lying to Daniel. And you've been lying to Mom for years. You've been embezzling money from your own company. You've been lying about your finances. And you've been trying to manipulate a woman who is far smarter than you'll ever be. The crowd murmured. Robert's face went pale. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected his own daughter to turn on him. He hadn't expected her to have the evidence. This is a lie, he said, his voice trembling. This is a setup. It's not a lie, Dad, Daniel said, stepping forward. He was holding a document in his hand, the contract for his studio lease with Robert's signature at the bottom. You were going to use me. You were going to take a piece of my dream and sell it to the highest bidder. You didn't care about my art. You only cared about the money. Robert looked at his son, his face a mask of shock and betrayal. He had lost. He had lost his children, he had lost his narrative, and he had lost the game. He had been so focused on his own greed, his own arrogance, that he had never seen the trap that had been laid for him. He had never seen that the woman he had always considered to be so insignificant, so powerless, had been a master strategist all along. He looked at me, and his eyes were filled with a cold, desperate fury. You did this, he said, his voice a low growl. You set me up. No, Robert, I said, my voice a whisper. You did this to yourself. You taught me how to play your game, and you just lost. He turned and walked away, a defeated man, his carefully constructed facade crumbling to dust. He had come here for a victory, but he had found only defeat. He had come here to take what he thought was his, but he had found that he had nothing left to take. He was a man with no family, no honor, and no future. He was a man who had lost everything because he had never learned to appreciate what he had. The crowd parted to let him pass, and as he walked out the door, he was alone, his world collapsing around him in a silent, final defeat. The gallery was a different place after Robert left. The tension had evaporated, replaced by a quiet, collective awe. People who had been talking in hushed tones now came forward, their faces filled with a mixture of respect and sympathy. The art on the walls, once just paintings, now felt like artifacts of a battle won. My instructor, her face filled with pride, simply squeezed my arm. Olivia and Daniel stood by my side, a silent, unbroken front. Later that evening, after the gallery had emptied and the paintings had been taken down, we went to a small, quiet Italian restaurant. The three of us sat at a corner table, the kind of table where you could have a real conversation without the pressure of an audience. The silence that fell between us wasn't awkward. It was a comfortable, welcome quiet. It was the space where healing could begin. Olivia, the one who always knew how to start a conversation, was the first to speak. "I've already started the process, Mom," she said, her voice low. "The lawsuit is filed. The fraud charges will be brought against him. He'll have to face the consequences of what he did." She didn't sound triumphant, just tired. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I should have seen it sooner. I was so caught up in my own world, I didn't see what was happening in yours." "I was too," Daniel said, his voice full of a genuine regret that I had never heard before. "I was so focused on my art, on my dreams, that I didn't see how selfish I was being. I used you, Mom. I'm so sorry." I looked at their faces, two people I had loved for so long, two people who had been blinded by a man's manipulation and their own ambition. The anger I had felt for them had long since evaporated, replaced by a deep, profound love and forgiveness. "We all make mistakes," I said, my voice soft. "The important thing is that we're here now. We're together." We talked for hours, the kind of honest conversation we hadn't had in years. We talked about the past, about the sacrifices I had made, about the dreams I had put away in the attic. We talked about the future, about the kind of family we wanted to be. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about love, about forgiveness, about a second chance. In the coming weeks, the legal process was swift and decisive. Robert's empire, built on a foundation of lies and manipulation, came crashing down. The embezzlement charges, the fraud, the years of debt, it was all laid out for the world to see. His business associates deserted him. The bank seized his assets. He was left with nothing but a reputation in tatters and a future in ruins. He was a man with no family, no honor, and no home. Meanwhile, my own life was transforming in ways I had never imagined. The inheritance from Aunt Beatrice was more substantial than I had thought. It was a liberation, a source of peace, a way for me to not only live my own life, but to help my children live theirs. I used a portion of the inheritance to help Daniel. I didn't just give him money, I invested in his art. I helped him secure a lease for a small studio, a space where he could create without the burden of financial stress. I helped him put on a new exhibition, this time with a collective of other young artists. He was no longer a pawn in his father's game, he was a leader in his own right. I also helped Olivia. I didn't buy her an apartment, but I helped her open her own law practice. She had always been a brilliant lawyer, but she had been trapped in a firm where success was measured by money, not by the quality of a person's character. She began to take on pro bono cases to help people who couldn't afford a lawyer. She was finally using her skills for good, and for the first time in her life, she was happy. As for me, I had everything I had ever wanted. I had my family back. I had my art. I had my home. The house, no longer a burden, was a symbol of my strength. I spent my days in the studio, painting, creating, living a life that was finally, truly mine. The quiet of the house was no longer a blanket of sadness, it was a sanctuary of peace. One evening, Olivia and Daniel came over for dinner. They brought flowers, a bottle of wine, and a quiet, sincere apology. We sat in the kitchen, a space that was once a symbol of my quiet sacrifice, and we talked and laughed and shared our lives. The laughter was a beautiful sound, a melody I had almost forgotten. We were a family again, not in the way we had been before, but in a new, stronger, more beautiful way. We had a new foundation, a new kind of love, one that had been forged in the fires of conflict and had emerged stronger and more resilient than ever before. We had learned that a family wasn't just a group of people living under the same roof. It was a group of people who had learned to forgive, to trust, and to love each other unconditionally. The house was different now. It was no longer just a place I lived, it was a home I had reclaimed. The dust of old memories had been swept away, replaced by the fresh scent of paint and the sound of laughter. I had kept the old yellow wallpaper in the kitchen, a quiet reminder of the past, but I had redecorated the rest of the house, infusing it with my own personality. I had filled the empty spaces with pieces of my art, with the colors of my soul. The house was no longer a silent witness to my sacrifice. It was a vibrant, living testament to my resilience. I used a significant portion of Aunt Beatrice's inheritance to create the Hayes Art Foundation, a nonprofit organization that provided grants and mentorship to aspiring artists who had been forced to put their dreams on hold. It was a way to honor Aunt Beatrice, a way to pay forward the gift she had given me, a way to ensure that no one else had to go through the same journey I had. The foundation was a success. We had helped dozens of artists, and the joy on their faces when they received a grant was a beautiful reminder of the power of a second chance. Daniel, with my support, had opened his own gallery. It was a small space, but it was filled with art that was honest, raw, and full of life. He had found his voice, not just as an artist, but as a person. He was a kind, generous man who had learned to be a good friend and a good son. He was a different person now, and I was so proud of him. Olivia, too, had transformed. She had left her corporate law firm and opened her own practice, specializing in family law. She worked with women who had been in situations similar to mine, helping them navigate the complex legal system, helping them reclaim their lives. She was a fierce, compassionate lawyer who fought for justice, not just for money. She was a different person now, and I was so proud of her. Robert, meanwhile, had been left to face the consequences of his actions. He was a man with no family, no honor, and no future. His empire had crumbled, his reputation was in tatters, and he was left to face the world alone. He had lost everything because he had never learned to appreciate what he had. He had been so focused on taking, on winning, that he had never learned how to give. 1 year after the gallery exhibition, on a warm September evening, I hosted a dinner party. It was a small gathering, just a few of my closest friends and family. Daniel was there with a new artist he had been mentoring. Olivia was there with her new partner, a kind, gentle man who had a genuine love for her. My old art instructor was there, her face filled with pride. We sat in the kitchen, the same kitchen that had once been a symbol of my quiet sacrifice, and we talked and laughed and shared our lives. The laughter was a beautiful sound, a melody I had almost forgotten. I looked at the faces around the table, the faces of the people I loved. I had spent so long living in a world of silence, of sacrifice, of a life I had thought was over. But now I was living in a world of love, of laughter, of a future that was brighter than I had ever imagined. My story wasn't over. It was just beginning. It was a testament to the fact that it's never too late to find your voice, to reclaim your dreams, to live a life that is truly, beautifully your own. Thank you for joining me on this journey. I hope my story has reminded you of the power of love, of forgiveness, and of the strength that lies within all of us. I wish you and your family good health and happiness.